Hey, Grace Church, Tim here, recording from my office here in Kingston. Yeah, just nice to chat to you again. And today I'm just recording a little bit of bonus content on our Nehemiah series. I hope you've been enjoying the series so far. I've done a couple of weeks, Nehemiah 1 and Nehemiah 2. And I was just super aware as I was preaching yesterday that there was a whole kind of section that I could have shared, which would have just taken our message way too long, right? We aim for sort of half an hour ish as we preach. And yeah, so just recording a bit of bonus content on particularly Nehemiah 2. Hope this will encourage you. Hope this will stir you. I think God is really speaking as we open His Word. He always does, but it really feels like this Nehemiah series is a word in season for us. Hearing lots of people afterwards, kind of chewing on it, sensing God speaking to them in their personal situations. I'm really encouraged. I was really encouraged as we read the story yesterday. I don't know if you noticed, if you were in the room, there was this like hush as people kind of tuned in. And Nehemiah is a great storyteller. I mean, it's Ezra using Nehemiah's words. But it's so evocative, isn't it? Like this idea of like, exploring the city walls at night, and oh, my horse, my mount can get through this bit. And so I just encourage you, read the story of Nehemiah in your own time. You might want to read it in one sitting and just get a kind of sense of the flow of the story, even as we get into this series. Don't we love God's word? It's just so alive and so powerful and so life changing. So I preached yesterday on serving the true king. We have Nehemiah interacting with King Artaxerxes. We're actually thinking about how we serve the true king. We said we're sent by the true king. I talked about just where God's placed you. That's where he's sending you. Notice Nehemiah does actually move. It's not like just where God's placed you, that means you're stuck there forever. He was there for some months, wasn't he, after that, after Nehemiah 1. He was there for a few months until Nehemiah 2. Actually, he'd been there decades. He'd been born in exile. So the Bible, Scripture teaches us sometimes there's times of waiting, times in the wilderness. It doesn't mean though that you're stuck there forever, and God can move you. He can move you 1,000 miles, like He did for Nehemiah. But actually, just realize and be reminded that actually where He's placed you, He's got a plan and He's got a purpose, and He can be sending you there. Nehemiah ministers to the king Artaxerxes, and then goes to Jerusalem. So it may be that that's God's plan for your life, and minister where you are, and also move you in the future. So trust Him for His plan. So sent by the king, supplied by the king, the best timber in the land, and then strategy from the true king. Like, how do I get from here to there? How do we build the walls? There's that kind of nighttime recce exploring, kind of the plans from Jesus being downloaded for Nehemiah, and then that response, that collective response to the kind of the call. Let's rebuild. Let's begin this good work, and how they kind of rallied together to respond to it. There's the recap. But I just wanted to just, as I said, give a little bit of bonus content, and really, it's all about communication. Really interesting to see just how good a communicator Nehemiah is. If you didn't know, he's like this class A leader, really amazing leader in so many ways. I just want to think about how he communicated to the king, and then how he communicated to his fellow Israelites. So with the king, he builds a bridge. I think this is good advice for all of us as we try and communicate, maybe with your boss, maybe with the world, maybe we're trying to share the gospel. Let's note what Nehemiah does. He builds a bridge. So he doesn't say one thing and then he does say another in his explanation of the problem. So he's actually quite intentional. Some commentators think he kind of takes a risk in showing his sadness. He's been kind of hiding his sadness for months, and suddenly he now shows his sadness when he's serving the wine. And King Artaxerxes notices, and he kind of says, "What is it you want?" Maybe slightly cynically, "Oh, what do you want?" And Nehemiah's taking a risk there because he could have been killed in kind of in being that presumptive in that position of a servant. Anyway, he builds a bridge. So in Ezra, we read that King Artaxerxes actually forbids the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So this is a number of years before. So there's something Nehemiah doesn't say. He doesn't say Jerusalem. He says the city of my forefathers. And so really interesting to note what he doesn't say. And then what he does say, he talks about the place where my ancestors are buried. the city where my ancestors buried. And yeah, within the culture of the Persian Empire, burial places for ancestors were extremely important. And so Nehemiah is very strategic, very clever in what he doesn't say. He doesn't mention Jerusalem at this point, but he does talk about this um, common area that they both would be kind of considered to be important, in saying like this is why I want to go to Jerusalem. And so it's interesting for us to think, how do I build a bridge with those I'm trying to communicate with those I'm trying to share the gospel with my boss, with my family member who I've fallen out with? How can I build a bridge in what I don't say at this point, and then in what I do say? And so we can think about sharing Jesus. In our culture around us right now in our society, there's a real sense of there's a real desire for justice, for people to be treated fairly, for people to be treated kindly. So kindness can build a bridge for people. Peace can be a way of building a bridge for people. Just showing compassion can build a bridge. And so just asking God to guide us as we try and communicate with other people. Like, where's the bridge that can be built between me and them? How can I communicate with them? Show wisdom in what I don't say at times and what I do say. Also boldness, that desire sometimes to go for it. So I hope that's a helpful little provocation. And then Nehemiah also shows great communication as he speaks to his fellow Israelites. As he gets to Jerusalem, he doesn't say some stuff again, for 3 days. There's wisdom in what he doesn't say at first. But then when after those 3 days and after he's done his recce, he then says a couple of things to his fellow Israelites. And let me just share a couple of points with us on this. First of all, he's real. He doesn't sugarcoat the situation. He doesn't pretend everything's all okay. He says in his very tiny speech, he says, "You see the trouble we're in." There's no head in the sand with Nehemiah. There's no pretending everything's all going to be easy and everything's all good. I'm told Churchill, obviously a great leader, particularly in World War II. I'm told that this was one of his key approaches to be very frank about the challenges ahead. We might think, oh, it's going to dismay people if we're real about the challenges. But actually, what it does, it builds trust and it rallies people together. And it shows the people that we're leading or the people that we're influencing that actually we haven't got our heads in the sand and we're aware of the challenges. Jesus was like this as well. He didn't just sugarcoat everything and say it was all fine, but actually he wept over Jerusalem, didn't he? And he was honest with us about taking up our cross daily. And so there's something I think in our communication about being real. There's also, though, amazing testimony at the same time. So it's not like one or the other. Nehemiah shares the testimony about what God has already done in opening up the situation for him to get to Jerusalem. So it says that I told them about the gracious, generous hand of God on me. And I think this is key as we share with one another to remind each other regularly and consistently about the things that God has already done. It points people to God's faithfulness. It points each other to the fact that God is generous and gracious. It builds our faith. It builds our expectation that because God's always acted like this in the past, because he's done these amazing acts of breakthrough and provision in the past, well, that's the God we serve, and that's what he's going to continue to do in the future. So I feel like there's that amazing balance of being real, being honest about the challenges, but also testimony of the goodness and gracious hand of God, sharing stories with one another about what God's already done. And then lastly, last quick point as we communicate to one another, Nehemiah goes to the heart about identity. He says, let's rebuild the walls and then we'll no longer be in disgrace. And so that's an identity thing, isn't it? Being someone who's in disgrace or being someone who has identity and dignity. And that's a gospel thing, isn't it? That like, who are we, Grace Church? What's our identity? Well, we're sons and daughters of the King. We've been redeemed. We've been made righteous. We are those who can hold our heads high and no longer be in disgrace because of all that Jesus has done for us. All right. And so it's really helpful, even as we communicate to one another, to be real, to share testimony, and to remind one another of our true identity in Jesus. I hope that's been really, really helpful. I spoke to loads of people yesterday about kind of just different areas they're feeling nudged in, they're feeling encouraged in, they're feeling God speak to them about. Hearing people share ideas of like, is God saying this to us? Could we serve the city in that way? So let's keep praying. Let's keep trusting that it's the true King that's sending us, and he's going to supply all our needs. He's going to give us the strategy we need to get from A to B. Let's let our response to this true King to be let's go for it together. Let us start rebuilding. In God, we can do it. I trust that's been an encouragement to you, Grace Church. I pray you have a fantastic week, and looking forward to all that God's going to be speaking to us about as we continue in our Nehemiah series. May God bless you. Cheers.